Well, folks, we have some breaking news that admittedly I wasn't expecting to happen. Pete Buttigieg has officially dropped out of the 2020 race. Now, if he was going to drop out, I assumed that it would be after Super Tuesday, but even then, I wasn't really expecting anyone to drop out because, there's currently this very obvious concerted effort to just rack up delegates in hopes that they can all pull delegates at the convention and take it away from Bernie Sanders, but he dropped out. Now, the obvious question is, how is this going to impact the race? And the short answer is I'm not necessarily sure. There are some polls that show that Pete Buttigieg supporters actually have Bernie Sanders as their second choice, but then there are other polls that show Bernie is their third or fourth choice. So it's really difficult to see who this helps and who this hurts, but I will tell you this. Pete Buttigieg dropped out specifically because he made a calculation, and that calculation is that he had to drop out. Perhaps the donors put pressure on him because they wanted everyone who is a moderate to rally behind Joe Biden. But either way, he wouldn't have dropped out if he didn't think that this would hurt Bernie Sanders. Now, will it hurt Bernie Sanders? I don't know. But best case scenario, let's actually assume that all of Buttigieg's supporters, or plurality more specifically, support Bernie Sanders as their second choice, and then they flee Buttigieg and go to Bernie Sanders. Well, still, you have, Joe Biden getting an extra 20%, Amy Klobuchar getting another 30%, I'm just spitballing here, and that could be enough to push them above the viability threshold. Now, if you look at polls, at least in California, one poll showed that Bernie was the only candidate who's viable, but now with Pete out, well, if all of the candidates get a boost, especially if Bernie Sanders gets the biggest boost, still this may not necessarily be good, because if the other candidates get enough to reach viability, then that's taking away delegates from Bernie Sanders. So that's why I say ultimately he made this decision because either something was promised to him, either the donors put pressure on him, but because he believes that this is the best course of action in stopping Bernie Sanders. Again, we don't necessarily know how this will affect the overall dynamic of the 2020 race. We'll find out on Super Tuesday, which is just a couple of days away. But I do know that he made this decision specifically because he wants to stop Bernie Sanders. And if you want a future in Democratic Party politics, well, as it stands currently with the status quo in place, if it remains in place, they're not going to take kindly to you in 2024 or 2028 if you stood in the race long enough to hand the nomination to Bernie Sanders. So this is a political calculation that I believe he thinks will ultimately be conducive to, a Biden victory or a Bloomberg victory, basically anyone but Bernie. Now, I will say that there is an immediate benefit for us with him dropping out, and that is that we won't have him attacking Medicare for All relentlessly, because regardless, if we just put the outcome of this election aside, we're trying to build a movement and a coalition in favor of Medicare for All, and, it doesn't matter how this election turns out, we still want that coalition to exist. We still want public approval for Medicare for All to be there. We want it to have majority support, and he's been effective at driving down support for Medicare for All. So with him gone, that's a benefit. Another benefit is that we don't have to look at his smug face anymore. Because I can't stand Pete Buttigieg. I cannot stand Pete Buttigieg. So with him out of the equation, at least we don't have to look at his face anymore. I will say that he had more delegates than Elizabeth Warren. So Elizabeth Warren, if she truly cared about getting progressive policies codified into law, now is the time for Elizabeth Warren to drop out. Now is her time to drop out, but I think what's going to happen is she's going to stay in at least until after Super Tuesday in hopes of keeping Bernie from winning Massachusetts, which he's polling ahead of now, of everyone, including Elizabeth Warren, so he may embarrass her and beat her in her own state. But with Pete Buttigieg dropping out, even if, let's say, 5% more of his supporters go to Elizabeth Warren than Bernie Sanders, then that may put her over the edge and deny Bernie Sanders a victory. And there's talks that Joe Biden doesn't want Amy Klobuchar or Elizabeth Warren to drop out just yet because, when it comes to Minnesota, the person who has the most momentum in that state to stop Bernie, at least, is Amy Klobuchar. So this is all calculated. Like, this is all the product of backroom wheeling and dealing, all to deny Bernie Sanders the nomination. And it's evident that Elizabeth Warren is part of that. And now her team is explicitly saying, we're basically in this race to stop Bernie Sanders' momentum. I think the exact word was to blunt his momentum. Now, we'll talk about Elizabeth Warren tomorrow in a separate video because I've got a lot to say about that. But putting that aside, this is an effort to stop Bernie Sanders. At the end of the day, will this be a strategy that's successful? I don't necessarily know. It's really difficult to say, and we'll find out as of Super Tuesday. Part of the issue is that a lot of people already voted in states like California, right? Because early voting already opened up. So for Pete Buttigieg, a lot of people already cast their votes for him. So I don't think that he's going to reach viability in California, especially now after dropping out. But anyone who's going to vote for, any of the Democrats now know that Pete Buttigieg is out. So I've got to go behind someone else. And we'll find out who they're rallying behind. I think that most likely we'll see a split. Not all of his supporters will, align with one candidate unless he comes out and endorses, which is likely probably after Super Tuesday, depending on how it all shakes out. But yeah, just wanted to get this news to you today. Pete Buttigieg dropped out. Surprising. It's good because I'm so sick of looking at him. I expect him to be back in the future, but we get a break in at least for now. But how is this going to affect Bernie Sanders? I don't know. If I had to guess, I'd say probably it will impact him negatively. But with that being said, not necessarily the case. It's not a guarantee. We'll just have to wait and see.
Alpha male, not a beta male.